I think it's very, very important that we hear what has been already done, what is out there, because there are people doing amazing things. So I'll put the word, I'll pass the word now to Greg. Who is Greg? Greg, thank you so much for everything that you are doing so far with us. And I have to say, we're really honored you said yes and participated so much, because guys, Greg actually is a very, very, very great expert in everything that is concerned with the ocean life, building ecosystems, innovative ecosystem, business models, regenerative business model. He's actually co-founder and CEO of the Urban Innovation Exchange and co-founder of the New Orleans-based Deep Blue Institute, which is actually focused on the development, deployment, and scaling of regenerative marine infrastructure to boost and fuel blue economy revolution. He's a talker, TEDx as well, so he has all sorts of articles. I don't know, Greg, did I miss something? I hope not, because actually I was so amazed when I was reading your description and when we were talking that you are actually giving us your time. So Greg, I'm sorry if I didn't do you justice enough. I'm just like wowed by everything that you represent. So please do fill in whatever I missed. And now the stage for the 1 hour and a half is all yours. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you very much, Urska. So yeah, just the basic flow of this will be, I'll give my talk now for about 20 minutes, and then we can open it up to questions and comments. And then after that, we'll go right into our panel with some wonderful guests that I'll also give some background in the course of the panel. I'll be moving relatively quickly through the presentation, and I have put a lot of information on the slides that I won't necessarily read, but as Urska said, the presentation will be available on video. So the idea is that people can go back, watch it again, check out the links, follow up on information, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, I'll share my screen.
Like the fleur-de-lis.
So what we'll be talking about today is what does a regenerative ocean-based blue economy look like? And my hope is that this will be informative not only for some of the folks that are joining that maybe have never heard of the blue economy or don't necessarily understand what's involved with it, but also very importantly for the most important people, I would say today, the people that are participating in the hackathon, to give them some background, some context on what they're doing, but also hopefully to inspire them to think really big about what the future holds, not just in the coming years, but in the coming decades, and how important this work is. So I want to start out by thanking Urska and the Transformation Lighthouse for their hard work in making this all happen. And also Metal Shark, which is actually a Louisiana-based company. And a lot of what we'll be talking about today will be focused on Louisiana and using Louisiana as a case study, but certainly things that are applicable to other parts of the world. So Deep Blue Institute is focused on regenerative marine infrastructure. And with that, we'll be touching on ideas like disaster risk reduction, marine habitat restoration, and cultural preservation, which are all part of these important components of blue economies for these at-risk coastal communities. So I'm joining you from New Orleans, and of course need to wish you all a happy Mardi Gras. But Mardi Gras 2021 is very different than it is in the past. So that's a picture that I took from a live cam this morning on Bourbon Street at one of the most important intersections, and you get an idea of what things look like this year compared to past years. So this is not just a cultural thing that is not happening for folks, but this is a huge economic impact on New Orleans, and for that matter, other communities around the world that are dependent upon carnival and tourism for a big part of their economy. So Louisiana's economy is in fact dominated by tourism, which we're realizing is much more fragile than we thought, and also petrochemical industries, fossil fuel extraction, which also now is in a real state of decline and in crisis. New Orleans is projected to be one of the 5 cities in the US most impacted by COVID. So these are critical needs that the blue economy can help in terms of adaptation, but also this is a unique potential for Louisiana and these communities to start to exercise leadership and have success in this area. So the marine blue biotechnology market is worth $3.4 billion globally, is expected to grow at a rate of 10 to 12%, and could arrive at 6.5 billion by 2024. So tremendous potential there. And globally, 3 billion people depend on marine and coastal areas for their livelihood. So around the world, fishing, tourism, commerce, transportation, all of these are things that these areas can start to exercise leadership in technology, but also in these blue economy models that we're going to be talking about. There we go. So Louisiana is losing a football field of land every hour and a half. So in the time that it takes to do our talk and our panel, effectively Louisiana will have lost another football pitch of land. Really, really frightening. And the Louisiana Comprehensive Master Plan projects that in the next 50 years, even under a medium environmental scenario, Louisiana could lose 2,250 square miles of land. So, and these are a lot of frontline, unique communities in Louisiana that have unique French Cajun language, music, festivals related to Mardi Gras and Zydeco music. So this is a huge cultural loss as well as economic loss and land loss. Unfortunately, this is kind of the new normal for these sorts of communities. In 2005, just 3 weeks after 50 levees and flood walls around New Orleans failed due to Hurricane Katrina, the Hurricane Rita again inundated these areas. So this is kind of the new future that these sorts of coastal communities are facing. Around the world, about 10% of the population, or 600 million people, live less than 10 meters above sea level, and about 40% live within 100 kilometers of the coast, 2.4 billion people. We just found out that 2020 tied 2016 as the warmest year on record. But as our friend Lisa Friedman, who you'll hear from later today, likes to point out, think of it instead of not that 2020 was the warmest year on record, but imagine looking forward that 2020 could be one of the coolest years on record, looking forward for the next 100 years. And that's kind of what we're potentially facing with climate change. Coastal communities are disappearing at an alarming rate due to this sort of flooding, storm damage, and other sorts of economic dislocation. Land loss is being exacerbated by storm surges and interruptions in normal cycles of river engineering. And nitrogen and phosphorus pollution are destroying rivers and lakes around the world. There are over 405 harmful algae blooms, or HABs, that are hypoxia dead zones around the world. And the one in the Gulf of Mexico, which is the second largest in the world, in 2019 was estimated to be close to 8,000 square miles, or the equivalent of 2 of the states in New England, Rhode Island and Connecticut. And then flood loss in the Gulf from food loss from in the Gulf from hypoxia is projected to be 235,000 tons annually. So this has real costs. NOAA calculates that we lose over $82 million a year in seafood and tourism due to these harmful algae blooms. And some data from Florida from their algae blooms in 2018 and 2016 and 2005 and 2007, they're losing millions and millions of dollars a year due to impacts that require beach cleanup and lost revenue and lost tourism revenue, as well as actual health issues. So the way that I actually entered into these conversations about the blue economy and blue tech was on a project where I met LeLaulu, who's one of our speakers today. And it was working with the Seasteading Institute, which was asked to come to French Polynesia and pitch to the federal government of French Polynesia the idea for creating a first prototype floating island. So at the time, I had formed a company called the Urban Innovation Exchange, or UIX Global, which focused on public-private partnerships for green cities and smart cities. And I was asked to come to French Polynesia to talk to French Polynesia about what some of the economic development benefits were for being one of the first nations and a leading nation in building these floating communities. And with the company Blue 21, which is a Dutch architecture and engineering firm, which is already building floating residential and floating conference centers in Rotterdam, we formed the company Blue Frontiers and proceeded to do a proposal for French Polynesia. That proposal was not eventually built for a variety of political reasons that I won't get into today, but we can follow up on if you want to learn more about that. But the design that Blue 21 did was a wonderful design that incorporated all sorts of natural factors and was very much focused on a regenerative engineering and design for the French Polynesian community. At a global scale, the United Nations is looking at the Sustainable Development Goals to help with climate change and other sorts of issues around the world. And Sustainable Development Goal number 14, which is called Life Below the Water, is focused on the idea to conserve and sustainably use ocean, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development, realizing that coastal and marine resources contribute $3 to $6 trillion a year to the global economy. So they've set some very specific strategy and goals for marine pollution and ecosystem protection and dealing with ocean acidification, dealing with overfishing, and conserving marine areas around the world and helping fisheries around the world, and basically dealing with these things that realize how important our ocean health is to the economy, but also to cultures and communities around the world. There's also an initiative from the UN called the Disaster Risk Reduction, and that recognizes that there's really no such thing as natural disasters, only natural hazards. And disaster risk reduction aims to reduce the damage caused by natural hazards like earthquakes, floods, droughts, and cyclones on an ethic of prevention. So these are programs that around the world the UN is supporting in order to help communities to deal with this. And that's a real opportunity for Louisiana and other low-lying communities to work on projects for improving water quality, for economic diversification that is critical for these communities, and then starting to exercise global leadership in distributed renewable energy and aquaculture and mariculture, which is seen as the fastest growing food sector in the world, and also sediment cycle restoration. When these rivers like the Nile and the Mississippi and other rivers, the natural sediment cycle is interrupted, it's part of what's exacerbating this issue of land loss and flooding for these communities. So this is all becoming much more recognized around the world. The Nature Conservancy recognizes the importance of healthy ocean habitats as they relate to tourism activities for snorkelers and other sorts of tourism. And certainly Louisiana, which is known as the sportsman's paradise, this is an important part of their tourism activities around sport fishing and the festivals and the marine-based activities that happen in Louisiana. In 2020, the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey realized that a lot of the conversations around the Green New Deal and sustainable economic development were really about land-based solutions. So they started to develop a blueprint for a US blue economy for the 21st century and develop their Ocean Climate Action Plan. So this is focused on using ocean and coastal resources to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and draw down CO2 in carbon sequestration projects, and to enable coastal communities to more effectively and equitably adapt to climate impacts. So it addresses coastal adaptation and financing, clean ocean energy, and ports and shipping and maritime activities, as well as sustainable fisheries, aquaculture, and marine biodiversity. So this is an important guide that now is available for communities around the world. So the idea what Deep Blue Institute is trying to achieve, and the reason that I moved back to my native Louisiana and I'm trying to help with the post-COVID economic recovery, is to bring to bear this global network that we have, some of whom we will hear from today in the panel discussion, these global experts and institutions that are already focused on different aspects of technology development, sustainable economic development, and other sorts of activities that can all of us together can contribute to the solution sets that then can be shared around the world to deal with these coming issues. One of our panel speakers today, Joe Mistich, is a LEED certified architect who will be telling us about the activities of Comey Resources and the work that they're doing to restore coastal wetlands and how those coastal wetlands can actually serve to protect these coastal communities while also providing valuable economic activity. We'll also hear from Rosaling Baitel of Panacea, who is doing some really amazing work in sustainable mariculture with sea cucumbers. But Rosaling is also leading a very dynamic community of seasteaders and marine engineers in Panama that are working on floating architecture, floating residential, and also projects for reef restoration. So a real mixed community of blue economy and blue technologies that can provide a real model for other communities around the world. Other partners of Deep Blue Institute include Pyramid Pure Foods, with whom we're working on technologies that incorporate crop production, water purification, energy production, habitat restoration, sanitation, and composting in river-based, sea-based, and land-based systems that can be deployed around the world and start to provide some of these technologies for low-lying coastal communities. And the reality is that a lot of the mariculture and aquaculture systems that we need are really already proven and just need to be deployed and scaled. So whether it be fish farming or algae or seaweed farming and shellfish farming, these are technologies that are really already exist and are proven. And the challenge is to get them out there and develop the markets and develop the supply chains so that they become a more regular part of our blue economies. Another important partner that I've worked with in the past is the Seasteading Institute that I mentioned before. And Joe Quirk wrote the book Seasteading, which in great detail lays out how floating nations can help restore the environment, enrich the poor, cure the sick, and liberate humanity from politicians. Wow, imagine that. So Joe lays out a number of different technologies and talks about the people that are working on those, and has some really interesting ideas about what the future holds for floating communities and all the technologies that can support them. More locally in Louisiana, one of the first initiatives that Deep Blue Institute will be working on is with our partner, the Clean Tech Open, which is an early stage clean tech accelerator. And we'll be working with local partners to launch a Louisiana Blue Tech Revolution that basically is working with Louisiana to identify local talent and to attract talent, which is very important for diversifying the economy, and to have them enroll in this accelerator that will have a blue tech focus and to start to bring some of that technology to bear in the local region. There's some wonderful work already going on in this respect, and one of the groups that is focused on the public-private partnerships that really drive these solutions forward is GNO Inc., or the Greater New Orleans Regional Economic Development Authority. So GNO Inc. realizes that economic development and coastal protection are mutually dependent, and it's deeply invested in ensuring that we have a sustainable and resilient coastal environment. So they're working on a three-pronged approach that includes public engagement with education and workforce development, developing and realizing state policies in various financing and funding initiatives, and then also engaging with the federal government and federal policy, which now with the new administration is very much in flux, but is offering more and more resources for helping the Gulf and restoring the health of the community locally. So again, there's a lot of information here. So we're providing the web addresses, and you can go back and take a closer look at some of this information and dig deeper on some of the work that they're doing. The work that GNO Inc. is doing is all under the Louisiana's Comprehensive Master Plan for Sustainable Coasts, which was developed in 2017, which starts to lay out these projects for flood protection, natural systems or ecosystem services, which again is some of the work that Joe Mistich is doing, restoration of coastal habitats, preservation of cultural heritage, and preserving the idea of a working coast as it relates to fisheries and other sorts of activities along the coast. And all of this falls under a legal framework, which is called the Coastal Wetlands Planning, Protection, and Restoration Act, or CWIPRA, which Joe Mistich will also explain a little bit and give some context for how CWIPRA informs all the other work that's going on in Louisiana. So the big vision that Deep Blue Institute wants to bring to Louisiana is bringing together all these resources and ideas for an idea we call the Nouveau-Né floating parishes of Louisiana. So Buckminster Fuller once said, you never change things by fighting an existing reality. You change something by building a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And that's one of the things that we want to look at for the future of floating cities and water-based communities, is to build these floating cities, floating communities that help Louisiana to transition to a marine-based economy and blue economy. The general idea is that these newborn parishes or floating cities would be paired with a delta-based or land-based city, and would help to augment and benefit from the existing land-based industries and infrastructure such as wastewater plants and agricultural activities. And through mariculture, hydroponics, pollution farming, and habitat restoration techniques would basically be receiving the nutrients and turning those into valuable food, water, and biofuels that the land-based community can benefit from. Then as the waters rise and these land-based infrastructure elements begin to go offline, the floating city can actually pick up more and more of the weight of these services. And then eventually, because realizing that that pollution is nothing but resources that we're not harvesting, and we can really use these for value, that the land-based community would actually start to that's being flooded would actually start to incorporate the technologies from the sea-based community, and this would be part of this marine-based ecosystem that would happen along coasts around the world. So these floating communities would be made up of all these new technologies that are some of which our hackers may be working on today, and would be built on 100% floating infrastructure that may be interlocking platforms. They would be engineered for the increased storm activities and disasters that will be happening. And they would be built on regenerative blue technologies that incorporate the idea of upcycling or circular economies. They'd be powered by 100% renewable energy. All of the materials would be recyclable materials. Water, energy, and waste systems would be completely self-sufficient, and again, would be regenerative. And all of the energy would be electric or biofuels. So there would be, this would be moving away from fossil fuels. There'd be organic food production, and all of the consumables or packaging would be part of this regenerative or circular economy. In places like Louisiana and other places that take on a leadership role, there's the opportunity for these to become global mariculture and blue tech development centers and expos that the rest of the world comes to visit, another form of tourism, to learn about and to get involved in these sorts of technologies. In this way, we would actually be preserving these bayou cultures, these languages and music, et cetera, and create centers, museums, and build on existing festivals to protect these communities. And all of this while harvesting urban runoff and nutrient loads from upstream pollution that would also be incorporating carbon drawdown or carbon sequestration. This in part is fundamentally what the Seasteading Institute has been promoting. The idea of first having more closer to land communities that with today's technologies, but then as the technology developed, moving farther and farther out onto the ocean, until in the long run, these could be independent sovereign nations that would be out in the middle of the ocean beyond the international borders. And that's where you can get into some very interesting ideas of experimenting with new forms of government, but creating these independent nations that are really being driven by the blue economy and by these blue technologies that we're developing today. Some of this sounds a little bit far-fetched, but the reality is that the technologies that are used to build these multi-billion-dollar oil platforms are the same technologies that can be employed in the future to build these blue and regenerative communities. Blue 21, as I mentioned earlier, is a Rotterdam-based architecture and engineering firm, which is already building floating row houses, residential, and conference centers that are being used. So these are really not new ideas. These are proven technologies that are starting to be scaled in the Netherlands. And the Netherlands is a country that really started developing these sorts of technologies hundreds of years ago with their flood control technologies, which they've turned into a net export industry of helping communities around the world, including Louisiana post-Katrina and New York post-Sandy, to develop flood control technologies that they developed in Holland. And Blue 21, this is part of the design from their French Polynesian proposal, realizes and is developing these floating communities that are very much environmentally sensitive and are drawing on regenerative technologies, so that in the case of the French Polynesian proposal, the commitment was to have a net positive impact on the lagoons or atolls where the floating communities would be built. None of this is actually a very new idea. Looking back again to Buckminster Fuller, in 1960 for the Tokyo Harbor, Buckminster Fuller was commissioned to design the Triton floating city, which was designed for a population of 5,000 people and used interlocking platforms and causeways to connect those. And even though this was not built, the US Navy did a feasibility study and found that it was an absolutely feasible project. And this was with 1960 technologies. So all of this is actually quite feasible. And since 1960, lots of architects and engineers have gotten involved to propose various ideas for ocean-based skyscrapers and hospitals and all sorts of amazing ideas for floating cities and floating communities, including this very elegant lily pad idea by Vincent Calabo that was proposed for Monte Carlo as, again, a near shore floating city for a country like Monte Carlo, which has very limited land, but could expand out into the Mediterranean. Closer to home here in Louisiana, in Florida, the architectural firm of Brooks and Scarpa in 2018 started expanding on some ideas that were developed by the Sea Grant and the University of Florida with a concept called salty urbanism. So this builds on the idea that there are parts of Miami and parts of Florida that are inland but are so low lying that it will be impossible to protect them from sea level rise. So these coastal uplands and barrier islands will basically, they're planning for them to be inundated, and as such, they're designing architecture and infrastructure so that they can continue to thrive in those areas. So Deep Blue Institute, again, is trying to bring together all these experienced global partners and collaborators, some of whom we'll hear from today, to develop and to implement these ideas. And we're hoping that this event with Metal Shark and all the folks that are participating will be interested in continuing the conversation and joining us for what's next. So I hope that this has been a bit of an overview of what does a regenerative ocean-based economy look like, and what are some of the strategies, and we'll hear more about them in the panel, because for everything that's going on, if we don't do it now, when are we going to do it? And if we're not doing it here, then where are we going to do it? And if it's not this group and the people that are participating today, then who is it going to be? So this is really a call, and again, a salute to Metal Shark and the hackathon today to think about what's next and how we can go forward with these sorts of technologies. So again, thank you very much to Transformation Lighthouse and to Metal Shark. And there's our contact information. And I certainly hope that we'll have some good questions now, but also feel free to follow up later on, either at our website or with my email, and we can continue this conversation about blue economy and blue technologies.
Thank you, Greg, so much. We actually do have one question already here. It was amazing what you presented. I have to say, blew our minds. At least speaking for me, I already see myself moving there somewhere. So it was amazing. I'm definitely looking forward to our further conversations, but let's go to the questions. So participants, feel free to unmute selves to ask the questions so that I don't read them loud. Or Hitesh, would you prefer me to do it? Engage in the conversation, you're free to do that.
Hi, Urska. Sorry about that.
No, all good.
Thanks for that presentation. Really fascinating. I'm sorry I missed some of it, which is a shame. But what you presented looked quite interesting. And interesting that you were saying some of these ideas were talked about quite a long time ago, and the technology was there to implement them. So my question really, there's a really push. I mean, I don't know if it's relevant to your presentation, but real push in the application of electric batteries and technology for vehicles and large vehicles, and especially in maritime as well. But particularly for the large heavy goods vehicle and probably in the maritime sector, that's probably years away. I might be wrong. And therefore, what role does biofuels and other alternative approaches like maybe retrofitting to reduce emissions and achieve the net zero targets fit into all this? Thanks very much.
Yeah, well, that's a very big topic in terms of all the different alternative energies and ways of doing maritime trade. I think without going on too long about it, there's different aspects of it that also include a reduction in global shipping. So it is believed that we've already reached the pinnacle of global large-scale container shipping, and this is likely to continue to reduce as we look at more locally based economies. But as it relates to the energy that moves that shipping, there's actually some interesting technologies that are being developed that even include wind, and so new types of sailing ships that are augmenting either existing forms of propulsion. But then the biofuels are something that the US military is looking at very closely and is financing. And then, of course, a shift to electrical types of propulsion and the batteries. But the batteries have a long way to go. Currently, we're still mostly focused on lithium-ion batteries, which can be very toxic, particularly in marine environments. So there's a long way to go on many of these things, but it certainly are all opportunities to participate in the economy, and again, to develop some of these new technologies that hopefully will come out of the hackathon today.
So much. Someone else? Teams, do take this chance now. You've been brainstorming the entire day, so now you have expert here. Ask him whatever popped up your mind while you were brainstorming and guessing what might be possible or not. Here's your opportunity. I guess they're a little bit shy, Greg. We'll just send you the questions later.
We'll have some time after the panel too. So
yeah, we can go to the panel if we want, and then see what new questions arise. So yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to share my screen again. So real quick to introduce our panel, and I really appreciate Joe and Rosaling and Lelei joining us, particularly on relatively short notice. All three of them are doing amazing work, and I know that they're very busy professionals. And what they'll be helping to talk to us about today is to look at the intermix of local initiatives, regional initiatives that can be adapted to other parts of the world, and then contextualizing those in global strategies. So our three panelists include Joe Mistich, who I mentioned is a LEED Green certified architect. He's based out of the New Orleans area and works for a company called Manti Resources and also Comate Resources, and is already doing some amazing work showing proofs of concept for marshlands and wastewater assimilation that can be used to create and grow these protective coastal zones and to incorporate those into the systems and the economic activities for these sorts of regions. Rosalind Baitel is joining us from Panama, from Puerto Lindo, I believe. And she, again, is leading a community, a mixed community of projects that include reef restoration and architectural and engineering for floating residential, working with the folks that are related to the Seasteading Institute, and doing amazing work there. And Rosalind's also originally from Louisiana, educated at Louisiana State University as a biologist. So I'm particularly interested and excited that Rosalind can comment a little bit on how the great work that she's doing in Panama could relate to Louisiana and other parts of the world to help them get involved in this blue economy and these blue technologies. And finally, Lelei, LeLaulu, who I mentioned I had the pleasure of meeting during my involvement with the French Polynesian Project. And Lelei, LeLaulu works with the Caribbean Media Exchange as well as Blue Guardians Council Alliance. But Lelei has done amazing work for organizations like the World Bank and the Clinton Foundation and other important global funds and groups that are looking at this at a global scale. And I'm hoping Lelei can respond a little bit to what Joe and Rosalind says and talk a little bit about how these ideas can be disseminated around the world, so that, as we talked a little bit about before we got started, how can this really become a global effort? So I know that I didn't do justice to all of their technical background, so I'm hoping that each of our panelists will give a little bit of additional background on where they come from and the type of work that they're doing. So with that, I'll hand it over to architect Joe Mistich, and take it away, Joe.
I will share my screen. Let's see. I guess I'll do it that way. Y'all can see my screen, I'm assuming.
Yep.
Okay. My name's Joe Mistich. Grew up in New Orleans, always kind of in the environment. Ended up getting really interested in construction, design, build, architecture. So I went to LSU and got a degree in construction. Ended up going to Tulane, getting another degree in architecture and a master's in architecture. I tell you that because in 1990, my thesis was architecture and coexisting in low-lying areas. And most of the professors was like, that's not architecture. But ended up doing it, and it worked its way to where we're at today. So a year or two later, I got in this position as a public works director of the city of Mandeville, and they had a sewer problem. And, you know, the interesting thing is when you have a passion for something, natural things start occurring around you. And I was thrusted into a sewer problem that was using innovative technologies at the time. Not very well thought out for the long haul, but up front, it had a great concept to reduce we're talking about reducing the electrical footprint, or basically our energy consumption footprint, and going to more of a natural management of domestic wastewater while staying compliant and disinfected. So the creativity happened in, I think, 88 with that. The Clean Water Act of 72 allows innovative solutions, but most people don't even attempt. So we had a problem with that plant when it was not complying exactly, but it was not doing a poor job at all compared to conventional treatment. So we basically took on the concept of thinking about the fork in the road, and do we go back to conventional wastewater management, or we go and continue down this path of path of uncertainty. And it was a challenge because from the passionate standpoint, I knew the natural solutions was the best, but yet it was unproven. So it basically took us about 7 years to get what I'm going to show you on the screen in a second permitted. I'm telling you all this background because we had a lead up to Hurricane Katrina that really changed a lot of the aspects of coastal protection, coastal restoration, and all these things in Louisiana. Prior to that, you had a lot of social groups that were passionate about the environment, and that's about as much as it ever got attention, from the hierarchy of politics all the way to Washington, all the way back down to your local subdivision, a small city. So as we were getting our treatment plant permitted, we were able to fight off the traditional standard way of managing wastewater. The pressures of that are tremendous, by the way. But we stayed the course, and we ended up with probably one of the best examples of a successful pilot project, publicly performed, one-of-a-kind type setup, and we designed it to enhance our coastal marsh, which we didn't own. So we had to do a land taking for 1,400 acres of land in a very conservative community. And that could be a whole discussion topic for another day, but very complex issues. We ended up saving 1,400 acres of pristine wetlands that needed to be saved based on some subsidence that were occurring. And what better use of what is perceived as a waste product in our natural function of coexisting in the environment, but our domestic wastewater. So we were able to take that domestic wastewater and start a long-term plan to continually provide nutrients to starving wetlands, and that'll be a part of some questions I'm sure later, by taking a product that everybody thought was useless and turn it into a commodity for good, and reduce the energy consumption by 75% with conventional treatment, reduce the maintenance operations of a traditional treatment plant down to an 8-hour shift, one 8-hour shift instead of 3. That's all energy right there. Reduced the possibility of discharging raw sewage in an environment. Katrina, our plant didn't have one out of compliance. That was tremendous. There wasn't a plant between east of Mississippi to Lake Charles, Louisiana that was probably functioning properly after Katrina. The impact of those plants going down has a lasting effect that can't be reversed that fast. It's really bad. Our plant, no out of compliance discharges. So we got through Katrina, and then we had the combination of Katrina, and very shortly after that we had the BP spill, and that's where QIPRA got its legs. And this is our group that speaks to the master plan group. But here's a little timeline of how before here you were talking maybe very small money, 10 million a year, 20 million a year, different allocations of funds to do little small wetland projects. And this would be federal down the state, not your volunteer groups. We raised a considerable lot of money. But in 2005, the immediate understanding that the levees broke in Louisiana, because historical data said that what was missing, and it was the trees. It was the wetlands that were missing. The amount of energy that came in off of Katrina would have been much reduced if we had our 1960s and before wetland conditions, because we had severe storms back then, and that energy was not delivered to the city to cause so much damage. So people that were typically naysayers about we having problems jumped on the bandwagon to start supporting the concept of we need to do reforestations, we need to start protecting things So that's kind of where New Orleans and the Louisiana region area, in that area, is starting to get educated of the sensitivity of these critical areas. So their money started flowing in, and while we're doing billion-dollar projects now on coastal restoration, all along the coast of Louisiana, Florida, well, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida, because of the combination of Katrina, Rita, and the BP spill. Let's see. I think this is a slide that's interesting. They've already spent $21.4 billion on coastal restoration since the BP spill. Okay, and that's all relying on the other side of the fence, us buying gas and fuel and things, because petrochemical companies are footing this bill. So it is a harmony and balance, and I'll talk about some of those things a little later on if we get into it. But these are all the projects that Cripper's taken on, and I'm expecting a whole bunch of questions about these projects, so please ask. Basically, I explained to y'all what Mandeville was up against. This is our wetlands assimilation process. Kind of explained that a little while ago. We've ventured out into some commercial work too now. So we manage about 17 cities wastewater through very fine limit processes and studying the existing receiving marsh or water body that we deliver our effluent to as a nutrient provider, obviously treated and disinfected to a level that was established through baseline analysis of the need for the wetland. This is the project I've been talking about. That is actually this area right here. Do y'all see my cursor? Is the actual treatment plant. And this is what we call the Chinchuba Marsh. So we were delivering all of our wastewater down this marsh area with the little rock reed filled man-made constructed wetlands. A little funny here. We built wetlands by man in wetlands before my time at the city. They funded a project innovatively, and they designed levee systems and built man-made wetlands when you had all this beautiful bottom-layered hardwood wetlands here. So when we did some analysis, we knew that we were going to have to increase capacity one day with all the urban sprawl. All the urban sprawl is what stops most of the nutrients from providing beneficial food for our plants that have many different layers of support for survival of a community all the way up the food chain. So this is the 1,400 acres of wetlands that was on the chart to be developed like this, like these areas. So the cost benefit analysis was getting very close that a developer that owned this property could come in and mitigate it, fill the whole piece of property, and build on it. If I go to my death, okay, one day, if this is just one narrative that I'm proud of, because we doubled the size of the city of Mandeville, and we did it from a conservative, we didn't take the property at the end of the day. We offered a very good deal to the landowners. They rejected it, and we actually went to fight, and we got what we wanted. They got their compensation, and I can sleep at night that we didn't do a taking. It's a very bad term that labels when need has to be played out, and use that word, because if society needs something, then it should pay the private owner of that something a fair wage, and that's going to come to play real soon in free energy and some of the things that are getting ready to occur technologically. Nikola Tesla was way ahead of his time. So I've seen a lot of things coming in the industry I'm in that's going to surprise people over the next 4 to 5 years. I guess the bigger picture here is based on back all the way in 1990, homing in on what I felt was important, not necessarily in the form of being an architect to build buildings. It was really about how do we coexist with these areas that we either born in or migrated to. And the Industrial Revolution ramped us to where we are. The internet.com and computer age and change of from resistors to chips changed us, and we're at a pivot point now. So, and when I look back, Industrial Revolution, obviously technological advances, but the time in which we communicate and the next steps to this COVID and all, we are definitely at a pivot point. And what's good about all this is we have the internet to share knowledge like we're doing today. And that's going to help us with our carbon footprint ultimately. But I guess I hang my hat on this little city ballooned in population very fast, and y'all can look at it on the internet to get the data. But I think that if we had better understanding of the why we do certain things, then maybe we would have a better understanding of the how. And I truly believe that zoning property should be based on the environment and the context, and not pressures, outside pressures on those environments, or what I call critical and sensitive environments. So we have a long way to go to change the thought process of the supply and demand equation of how communities develop. And I got to understand this through managing a city and dealing with its wastewater, because that is a baseline of how a community is surviving and how it's healthy, as a sense. So I'll open my piece up to questions. Is that how we do that now?
No, we'll go straight to Roz and Lelei,
Yeah.
and then we'll do questions at the end. Thanks.
Too long? Greg?
Okay. I'm not sure if everybody can see me or hear me.
So
You got to
yeah,
share.
Joe.
I'll share.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Yeah, and then Roz, you can.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody, for having me on the panel. My name is Rosaling Baitel, and I'm speaking to you from the Republic of Panama. And we are in a community here along the Caribbean coast near the historic town of Portobello. So as you may know, the country of Panama, where the Panama Canal is, we're on the northern coast, the Caribbean coast, and it's quite a water-based community where we are. A little short background. I'm originally from Louisiana, as Greg said earlier, from New Orleans. I'm a graduate of Louisiana State University, and I got a degree in biology, moved to Panama for a job in biology back in the 80s, and I stayed. So I ended up marrying a Panamanian, had both our kids here. Our kids live in the States now. So I've been in Panama this year, 36 years. So it's been quite a lifetime, but my heart is really still in Louisiana as well. So basically, why are we in this area of Panama? Well, my husband, the man I married, is actually from the province of Delaune, which is on the northern side of Panama. It's the Caribbean entrance to the Panama Canal. And when I say we're a water-based community, primarily the area where I am right now was fishing. For the last 100 years, it was mostly a fishing community. Well, you know what's happened to most coastal fishing communities in the last 20 or 30 years. If they weren't done sustainably, they're extinguishing. So then this area took on tourism. And tourism sounds really great until a worldwide pandemic hits and tourists can't get places. So because we own a lot of coastal property in this area and we have a second home here, which has now become my primary home, when the pandemic hit, I basically moved out here on a full-time basis. And that gave me the opportunity to really meet the neighbors, see the community very deeply, and see how we could make this community move forward after COVID and make the community prosperous. So I'll recycle back to the fishing area. There is a fishing cooperative, but even the older fishermen in the area will tell you, very similar to what Joe just said, you know, the fish have been fished out. So there was a lot of frustration already in that they weren't able to monetize that anymore. We also have the luck that about 10 years ago, a company called Open Blue started in Panama. They are open ocean fishing a fish called cobia, which is an Atlantic fish, delicious fish, and they farm them in these open these cages way out kilometers off the shore. So that gave our area a little bit of a foothold in aquaculture. The Open Blue company employed a lot of people that formerly were fishermen. They were building the cages, they were surveying the cages. It became a little bit of an economic base for our community. And so with that, I got to be very friendly with them. I've always been passionate about sea cucumbers. Weird there, but so I asked them, would they be interested in cultivating sea cucumbers? And they said, no, we're doing open ocean cobia. We're not interested. So I just started to talk that up and finally found the right set of partners and investors, and it's all a good fit. So Panacea, if you cycle back and see the information on my LinkedIn and my bio, and you can see the link there, Panacea is our sea cucumber hatchery, and we've been operating now for about 2 years. So in this same community, my husband, with a group of investors, a couple of blocks down the road, about 10 years ago as well, started to build a yacht marina, because tourism as it is not going to work for us. We're in a remote area. It's a little hard to get to, but we are a transit point for boats going anywhere from the Sandblast Islands, which are islands that are breathtakingly beautiful in Panama, to the Panama Canal. So our property sits between those two destinations. So we're a transit point for sailboats, primarily sailboats, but some power yachts. All of them want to see the Sandblast Islands and they want to go through the Panama Canal. So it was the boaters who asked us, please put a marina here, put some goods and services so that we can buy fuel and we can buy ice. So you can also look up our marina is called Linton Bay Marina, Linton Bay Marina. We'll be sending you all these sites after. So that gives us another anchor, right? We had Open Blue, we have the Sea Cucumber Company, we have a full-scale yacht marina that has a haul-out crane and fuel and slips and convenience store, all of this in our little water-based community. So then comes along Greg's friend, Joe Quirk, from the Seasteading Institute. Joe has actually visited me at my house. And they were very interested in our water-based community because they were building in Thailand, they were going to build these floating homes. Well, my husband said, why don't you come do them here? We have all the permits from the government to fast track your operation. We have a yacht marina with full machine shops and everything. So now I can very proudly say that in the last year, Ocean Builders is part of our Linton Bay Blue community. They're creating jobs, they're building their floating homes. They have a presence in the community. When COVID hit, if you look up on my Facebook page and scroll through, we were doing donation drives, bringing food to the local people and drinking water and masks. We had masks made for everybody. So our community is widening, our blue community is widening. So then you add on top of that, we are now partners with an organization called Reef to Reef Restoration, because realizing that we really do have to protect the reef in front and the beautiful blue ocean that we have, we're now with these coral reef restorers that are placing reef balls, structures on which coral will grow and continue to restore the reefs, which is going to help us with our sea cucumber grow out beds as well. So in our little blue economic zone of Linton Bay, we're looking at Ocean Builders, which is part of the Seasteading group, Reef to Reef, which is the coral reef restoration. We have our Linton Bay Marina, which is great. And we have our Panacea aquaculture, which is also great. And then Open Blue, because they really needed a bigger operation. They only have a very small staging ground in our community now because they bought hectares and hectares of land further up the coast because they just scaled their project. They're producing millions of fish a day in those cages. So that's a very exciting business model for us to look forward to as we scale our operation. Through our Panacea, I'll show you my little shirt there. Through our Panacea aquaculture company during COVID, we were writing a lot of grants. We got a grant from the Inter-American Development Bank, which allowed us to move forward with our algae lab. So I'm very proud to tell you that part of our aquaculture company, now we're also producing algae. And we see that going forward as another income stream and another product that we can monetize in our area. So there are going to be a lot of subheadings coming as a result of this blue economic zone that we're creating here. I'm also very happy to tell you, since I'm originally from New Orleans, Greg and Joe, everything you've been able to do, good luck, because governments are really difficult. But I'm very happy to say that in Panama, because COVID hit so drastically, we have a large Asian population and we are a transit point of the hemisphere for travel. So Panama was hit very hard, and the government recognized that economically we needed to do more things to get up and running. So they are our biggest cheerleader. The government is extremely helpful. They're also helpful to Joe and the seasteaders and the ocean builders. But the government is saying to us, yes, we want you to succeed. We know you're in this remote area. We know you're giving jobs. We know tourism is not going to come back soon. So please create more entities and further the blue economy here. So that's been good for us as well. So I think I've hit on most of the, one more thing I will tell you, if you go to the websites of Panacea, Ocean Builders, even Linton Bay, all of those entities have incubator tabs where if you, for example, if you're a scientist and you want to come work with us, great. Panacea has dorm rooms, you can stay there. Ocean Builders has housing also. I know they have several incubator interns down here with them. So we touch a lot of boxes. We have technology, innovation, education. We have finished products for commercial purposes, but we're also involved in conservation, tourism. So I think we check a lot of boxes there for our little blue economic incentive zone. So I hope that covers it. You told me I had 10 minutes. I think that was 10 minutes. And so I'll stay after for any questions after the next presentation, if you'd like.
Thank you so much, Roz. That was very informative. So with that, we'll go to our global scale, and Lelei, LeLaulu, who I mentioned I got to meet in French Polynesia, thinking about all the ways that the Polynesian and island nations could start to take on a leadership role in the technologies that can help with climate change and sea level rise. And as they point out, even though the island nations had the least to do with climate change, they are the nations that are most impacted by it. And I know that's something that Lelei thinks about a lot. So with that, I'll hand it over to Lelei. Go ahead.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Ursula, and everybody for having me on here. And thank you, Greg, for reminding the world of the importance of small island states, because what's forgotten is the fact that the Rio Earth Summit in 1992 in Brazil, the Alliance of Small Island States, they pushed tremendously to get an item on the agenda, which was resisted by practically every nation that was there. And that was to put the issue of climate change on the global agenda, on the UN agenda of the development conference. And after an enormous amount of fighting, blackmail, and cajoling, it finally was put on the international agenda, where climate change has remained ever since. So people have forgotten that because they think that, what's the name of the vice president? He made it up. But it also proves the fact that, the quality of the advice does not depend on the size of the advice giver. just a couple of notes about former presentations, which I'll go to, as part of my little talk. But Joseph's work on wastewater management rather than disposal is really important, I think, and it's something which entrepreneurs should be looking at as they survey the global scene as to what could become important, because it's the management of wastewater, not the disposal of it. It's not wastewater, it's the management of new water, if you like, into the systems that we have so much. And then also the fact that coastal erosion, it's destroying so much land all over the world. And I think there's too much of a barrier type system. In fact, in many developed countries, they think that let's build an ocean barrier, big, huge concretes to stop the rise of the flow of the oceans. But we in Polynesia, what we do instead is we get our surfboards out and we surf the waves that are coming in, and then move our settlements accordingly. So the whole point is to look at nature and ride and surf nature and bring in highly developed technologies to deal and to use it to your advantage. Basically, using a disadvantage to your advantage, using the latest science which we have, and there's an awful lot of it. So I think that what Joseph's doing in Louisiana is going to be terribly important for other countries around the world who, for a start, most of them do not know the extent of the erosion in where they live. For example, Harvard's study shows out that that the Carolinas are losing 17 inches a day or something, which is enormous. Very few people in the Carolinas know that. They should know this, and they should not only know this, they should know what they can do about it to save themselves and others. Thanks to, not thanks, but the terrible hurricanes which hit the south of the United States showed the fragility of systems which did not take into account the constant flow and the rhythms that nature builds us with. It's not the oceans are not there to destroy us. The oceans are there to feed us, to give us succor, to give us shelter. And rather than fighting it, we should look at what they're offering and deal with it, and use it and incorporate it in what we do. So I think that increasingly you're going to see business opportunities coming out of the sort of work that you're doing, Joseph, because I think it's wonderful. And it also is a wonderful link to seasteading. Again, you're not trying to block the sea. You're using the sea to extend the life of people on the lands, and also to enhance their quality of life, while at the same time giving technology to the mainland populations who really could do with it and need the sort of technology that you're bringing. So not only is it an exchange of technology from the more technologically advanced countries to the less developed, but it also is providing people from developed economies an opportunity to enhance their lifestyles and what they want to do with the resources that were given to them. Anyway, that's taken up half of my that lecture's taken up half of my time, but I'll try and be quick. Again, isolated island nations, they've been ignored for so often. They say, oh, they're so far away, forget them, blah, blah, blah. So who wants to go there? However, with the advent of travel and things like that, isolated island states have used their geographical isolation, formerly a disincentive to foreign investment, and turned their remoteness into an economic advantage through tourism. Why? Because everybody who has money or who doesn't have money wants to visit an island. And that's what oceanic people give. They give you islands. And which is why tourism is so important, as we heard from Rosalind's presentation, so important to communities which have very little else to go with. And tourism is the largest and fastest growing, a sector of the economy that we know. And it's even though COVID has knocked it back, as you will see after the 9/11 events in New York City, the fastest recovery from that tragedy was tourism in New York. So likewise, the fastest way to recover economically after COVID is going to be with tourism, because the pent up desire to travel has become so great. It's like, these are like sort of tidal waves, tsunami of desire, which are going to burst. And so smaller countries have to be ready to receive all these, right? But tourism for me is a development person. Oh, I call myself a development entrepreneur because it's, you know, I just jump at anything that pops up, sort of ADD with oceans. You know, tourism represents for me, it's the largest voluntary transfer of resources from the haves to the have-nots of the world. And it's voluntary. Can you believe that? If you think of the hundreds of millions of people who've lost their lives, their communities, trying to defend their resources from others who want them, or by trying to take it from others, if you think about it, this is a voluntary transfer of resources never ever seen in the world before, and it's the largest industry in the world. So you have to be cognizant of that and be ready to take advantage of it as it develops in different ways. It may not necessarily get bigger, but it may get more specialized, even smaller, but it will generate more revenue for people who are involved with it. And also the thing is, think about tourism. It's the only industry where people arrive where you are and they'll say, hey, where can I spend my money? And they complain if they cannot spend their money. What other industry is there that people complain about the fact that there's not enough restaurants, there's not enough bars, and no, you know, I can't go back with all this money. This is ridiculous. I've saved this and I have to spend it now. So, you know, this is another thing about tourism, which is very important that people should remember as well, because it's not just bars and restaurants. They want to see what you live. They want to experience what you experience where you live. It doesn't matter how boring or how mundane it is. They want to experience it. This is what's called experiential tourism, and it's growing enormously. So, you know, as also it does generate a tremendous number of jobs, as we heard from Rosaling. You know, their communities adjusted to the economic difference changes and built marinas and embraced tourism. And I noticed, I think the last World Bank figures that came out for Panama, I haven't seen them for about 6 or 7 years, but in Panama, sustainable tourism, especially working with the sort of things that you're doing, generated over 10,000 jobs. I'm sure it's way more jobs now than it was then. And also in 2009, which is the last year the World Bank took figures, Costa Rica, just up the road from you, they generated 63,000 new jobs. And also the thing about tourism is that, you know, this is what economists love. It generates new money. And this is an important thing for development people all around the world. I'm going to cut this back a bit. But also for small communities, you know, outward migration is decreased because people can stay at home in their home places now because there's a way of making money. And the great thing about it too is that the money generated by community tourism, local tourism, that money goes straight into the pockets and the bank accounts of the communities and the people. It's not like a big, huge multi-million-dollar grant from the European Union or the United States that goes through governments, and then you know who knows what happens to it in the end. But this is money; it comes straight into the pockets of people, and as I said, you know, it also revives cultures because tourists, as I said, with this experiential thing, they want to know more about your culture than you know yourself half the time. So you have to go back and ask your grandparents, hey, what were some of the songs you guys sang? What were some of the dances that you did? Because we want to do them because these damn tourists are asking us, you know, for more and more experiences. So it revives your cultures in that way, in a wonderfully meaningful way. And of course, you know, tourists, they love this sort of thing. They want to see everything and they don't care how savage you are, but they'll do everything as long as they're accompanied by a drink of funny color with an umbrella in it. And, you know, again, tourism has reversed the traditional flows of from the colonized to the colonizers. Because, you know, true independence, as we all know, true independence is only possible not just with political independence, but it's with economic independence. If you don't have economic independence, you do not have true independence. And this is what tourism offers these small island states who are not they cannot benefit from the huge flows of international finance that benefits the more developed countries. And also the thing is that, tourism, it protects the natural resources so easily. As we heard from Rosalind, that they've started to rebuild the reefs through coral gardening and other things, which is great because tourists want to see clean reefs. And also you have to remember that the reefs, by preserving the coral reefs, you are also preserving fish. And there's a little fish called a parrotfish like the bird. This fish cleans the coral. It eats the coral, gobbles it up, and then it excretes sand, which then goes to make beautiful sandy beaches. In other words, fish poo provides beautiful beaches. And if you don't have a sandy, beautiful beach, the tourists are not going to come. And also the huge benefit that the reefs provide for protection against tsunami and surges. And the fact that, it does produce, according to World Bank's the most optimistic World Bank figures, it generates $55 billion in resources throughout the world, the constant sort of saving of our reefs. I also want to have time to look at just one other thing, which is fish and the importance of fish as a natural resource worldwide. And as we know, it's being fished out by people, by fishing fleets from all over the world. They sail thousands and thousands of miles to clean up the oceans of fish in so many other less developed parts of the world. And this is it's the only resource, natural resource, which has attracted the wholesale attention of the richer countries in the poorer countries. And so, rapacious and capacious fishing fleets, they're just dredging and netting and killing the fish stocks and taking it far, far away. And we're approaching total depletion of many fish types around the world. The thing is that it also deprives oceanic communities of major sources of protein. This is used because the local fishermen can't get out because, there's no more fish out deep. So they have to fish in the lagoons, depleting the lagoons of fish which protect the reef, the coral reef. So, it's all connected. But what gets me is the number of people who say, I don't like the fish. It smells fishy, or it tastes like a fish. And I keep saying, well, why don't you eat chicken then? And they say, no, I want fish. And so all these fleets are going all over the world to get things which people will only like about 5% of it. And the rest goes into making cat food or something. And another thing about the fish producing industries, that for most islanders, they say, why is it that a can of fish, the can costs more than the fish inside it because of overfishing again? And so this is nuts. So small island states, they're getting money from fishing fees from fishing countries like Japan, Korea, Spain, and others. But, the money, the fishing licenses, it doesn't go very far. So what do we do with that? Again, we look at something like recreational fishing. Recreational fishing, it's how am I doing for time, Greg? I think I better get close to shutting down. But recreational fishing, just some figures, just quickly on recreational fishing. The World Bank worked out that for every pound of commercially caught fish, by these big fishing fleets, for every pound caught commercially, the economic benefits to the local community was $21, $20+, $20 a pound economic benefit for the local community in the country. However, for recreational fishing, the benefit economically to the local communities per pound was $624 per pound. And that does not count bait and tackle. So that gives you the enormous potential that's held by recreational fishing. And again, because of the fact, imagine an island, you're looking at fishing fees, it doesn't come to you. You're looking at recreational fish, and you look at how this comes to you again. Because, they don't catch as many fish. Recreational fishing people, they'll quite often throw the fish back, or if not, they'll give it to the local communities as food. But consider if there were recreational fishing routes all throughout the world, especially across the ocean, so that, there are something like 2 to 3 to 400 million people who define themselves as recreational fishermen, and they travel. They go airplanes, they spare no cost, and they drink a lot of very expensive booze, and they stay in very expensive places. So these people are very valuable for what you do, for what you want. So if you can imagine these fishing routes coming from, say, the west coast of America, all the way through French Polynesia, through Samoa, Tahiti. I'm from Samoa. They can go around Samoa twice, and then up through Southeast Asia to Asia. Consider the possibility of income generation there, and also consider the fact that the money that the locals will get, which will mean they do not have to sell their fishing rights to these rapacious fishing fleets taking their fish to make cat food in the middle of America. That's a possibility there. And and like you heard from Rosalind, it's the community benefits are great. I mean, the Italians have had their version is called pescaturismo, where they get the people who can't fish anymore, and they take the tourists out, and they sort of experience life on the boat. They learn about the local communities. They learn how to cook fish. They learn how to catch fish. They learn about bait. They hear all these lies told by fishermen about how big their catch was, and all these wonderful things. And that's worked so well in Italy that now they've extended it now, and now they offer sort of stays with fishing families. So you can spend 1 night, 2 nights, 3 nights, whatever you like, with these fishing people. So it is giving these people an income, a solid income, but it also gives them a sort of a renewed pride and dignity in what they do and where they live. That you can't buy. So, okay, that's these are huge possibilities all around. I'm not even going to touch aquaculture because that's way too big, except for the fact that I think aquaculture should not be aqua; it should be land-based. What are we talking about here? I've recommended to the World Bank, and they all still laugh at me, that we take Detroit, which has so much abandoned land and buildings. We go to Detroit and build the fish farms in these empty buildings. Because what is the problem? They don't need to be in the middle of an ocean instead of dirtying the ocean for everybody else. Scientifically, aquaculture will get better and better as we go, and it'll become cleaner. And then with Joseph's wastewater management, you'll be able to use those so-called wastewater on land for nourishing these fish stocks. And why Detroit? Detroit's on a huge body of water, which can then transport the fish all throughout the East Coast in water, which has been managed by people like Joseph's company. And of course, why Detroit again? Because Detroit, has all this land. You can, up until a couple of years ago, you could buy an entire block in Detroit for $100. No longer, it's getting probably $200 now. But it's using a resource which has been discarded or overlooked. This is the whole essence for me of development, is using and reusing something which other people throw away. That's the essence of sustainability in the long run. It certainly applies for the blue economies, everywhere else. Otherwise, look at the amount that we throw away. Now, just as a final point, in the Pacific, we know how fragile all our resources are, our fish, our environment, our people, and our oceans. So that's why we have become out very, very supportive of marine protected areas. And, we have millions of square miles of the Pacific now as designated as marine protected areas. But the people are saying, hey, that's very nice. What about us? We're keeping this water clean for all you Westerners coming in to enjoy the pristine waters of the Pacific. What about us? We can't fish anymore. What's the problem? So this is, again, where recreational fishing comes in important, because it allows the locals to start reusing their traditional ways of feeding their families and their communities. But think about it. If Polynesia, for example, that means many islands in Greek. That's where I'm from Samoa, which is the center of Polynesia, which means that it's the center of the world. Anyway, in Polynesia, we look around, we think, hey, since the West has been here, our health is not getting better, it's getting worse. We have more health problems. We're not as rich as we were before because, we don't have any resources. And, our kids are leaving and going away far away and not coming back. Where's the benefit of, signing up to these Western models? It's not doing us any good. So what if they decide, and also they think, oh, look at these big powers, look at China and Russia and blah, blah, blah. They're all fighting over our waters and our fish, blah, blah. What if they decided to drop the coconut curtain, kaplunk, on the 10 million square miles of Polynesia? Think of it. Polynesia is 10 million square miles, which means that you can fit the United States and Russia into Polynesia. That's how big it is. So what happens if they bring down the coconut curtain and say, okay, that's it, no more outsiders, only recreational fishermen who are willing to spend lots of money, and only high-end tourists who are willing to stay with us and really experience our own environment, things like that. Think about that. What would happen if people started doing that? Because I think that with the increasing isolationism, we could say Polynesia first too, And if this starts to happen, then you lose a wonderful oceanic playground, but we then protect and steward the largest body of water on Earth. We keep it clean for your grandchildren and their grandchildren. But politically, it could be very, very difficult, especially if the Chinese supported it. Anyway, I'm going to stop there and hand it back to Greg.
Thank you very much, Lelei. Wonderful. Well, Urska, we're coming up on our time. Do we have time for a couple questions?
Yeah, of course, definitely.
So I'll start it out, and then we can open it up. This is probably directed a little bit at Lelei, but potentially Rosaling, and it's this idea of the things that we're talking about and the adaptation, or how someplace like Louisiana, which Rosaling knows is very complicated in terms of politics and power and all that. How can we take the models that you, Rosaling, are working on, and some of the ideas I think that Lelei brought in terms of really the importance of tourism and how so much of what we're doing maybe has its own economy within it, but because it's regenerative and it's actually cleaning the environment and cleaning the ocean, it is supporting tourism. How can we bring it to places like Louisiana and other places that, to be fair, also have very complicated political systems?
Lelei, can I just shortly address that? And in our particular case, what our model is, make the government look good. We will do all the work. We don't ask them for anything. We invite them to come see what we're doing, and we give them the credit. And COVID has given us a chance to do that, to invite local ministers down and show them what we're doing. Louisiana, this would work great as well, because the politicians need a project. They need a poster child to prove success. And Lelei, I was very happy to hear you championing the tourism. We are a tourist-based community, and we will get there again after COVID. But for a politician, they want to hear a multifaceted income streams. And so the fact that you can offer them, wow, we're going to do aquaculture, we're going to do production, we're going to do communities, waste treatment. That's kind of how we're operating here, and showing the government the whole big picture of the blue economy. Because government officials tend to be very narrowly focused on their one area of expertise. So broadening their scope is another big part of what you all are doing in South Louisiana.
Yeah, good point, Rosaling. The thing is that the good work that people like Rosaling is doing in their Panamanian communities, rather than trying to export it themselves, I think people should be brought in to look at it, especially entrepreneurs and business people. They should look at the model and they can see what applies to their own communities and then do it from there. We can't be a bunch of, sustainable missionaries going all over the world trying to, apply models which work with us. But yeah, that's I mean, the work that Rosaling's doing and what Joseph's doing, they're all combined because, most of our policymakers, they're classically trained economists. So, they're at least 30 years behind reality in terms of what happens out there in the world. And they've only just discovered new money outside of the budget parameters. So the brighter ones, they recognize the linkages that tourism provides in so many different sectors. If you look at the number of people employed in the tourism and tourism linked sectors of economies, you'll notice that it's the largest economic driver the world has seen. So, we have to also educate our policy and decision makers, which is why we set up the Caribbean Media Exchange in the Caribbean. Basically, the task was to move sustainable tourism out of the lifestyle section onto the finance pages of publications. And that's what has to be done to get policymakers attention. Forget about all these sort of lovely things that we like, environment and beautiful this and blue that and blah, blah, blah. Hit them in the wallet, show them where to fix their wallet, to fix their budgets, and they'll quickly come around.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Can we open it up to some of our hackers or guests?
Yeah. Does someone of the participants have any questions? I know that there was a lot of topics, a lot of things to think about, so many interconnections, so many interesting projects.
I have a very important question to pose to the Louisianans here, and that is, what do you actually put absinthe in your sazerac these days, or is it still illegal?
Yes, it's put in.
Yeah.
Oh, it's legal then. Okay. Oh, I'm terrified. It is my national drink, by the way.
One of the things that y'all will both touch on was obviously the tourism economy for all these communities. But I think with our current generation that's maturing into traveling is more astute today. And I think if we start presenting these areas as ecotourism places, that you get an eco experience, and it's the branding of that and the dictionary of verbiage, I don't think has been thoroughly written for the common folks to utilize mentally, to want to travel to a place, not only to have a party or to have fun with friends, but also learn about not only the culture, but the actual environment and why the environment drove the culture to where it is. And while they go through the processes, they get the pluses and minuses of community stresses that we put on our environments from A to Z. And the better we educate people, not where it's not driven down your throat in a news article, but it's through an experience. And I think that's how you do that with ecotourism. And I truly believe Louisiana could harvest a tremendous opportunity in the tourist in understanding of these very critical and sensitive areas that promote life. I'll kind of end, but folks, I think there's a combination of where water meets land. Okay, we're talking about at the nano level. That's, I think, the essence of life, where it starts. I know whoever creator and all that, but without those two things happening, and then a clear understanding of thermodynamics, we would have not evolved to where we are today. But what we haven't done is look back on those two things and said how we are affecting, how we're not living in harmony with a good rhythm as we develop our communities, as we build our ant pile. It's all we are, little communities. I think we really, really need to rethink how we approach things and always ask the question why before the how. And I could talk hours about those two words and how much meaning they have and how they relate to most of our problems today. Because we don't have why are we really doing this? Why are we wanting to make this a pristine coastal area recreation? Why? Go as far down as you can. Then you say, okay, how do we do this? How do we do this right for our children and our grandchildren and their grandchildren? Otherwise, we're in serious trouble.
It's a very good point, Joseph, because it's because that we haven't asked the question why for so long that things have been taken for granted, and things like our environment, our sources of food, our sources of culture, they've been taken for granted. And this is what happens. Once you take something for granted, then get used to the fact that you may lose it pretty soon.
I mentor young high school kids. And I'll leave y'all on this last one. I said that before, but when we start talking about happiness with these kids and what makes them happy and what makes them passionate, we start talking about careers that relate to that. But at the end of the day, we talk about these 6 things that I like to leave them with by the end of the summer. And when you get them in order, they're very basic. We all know them. What we need. What are our needs? Well, simple. It's 6 items. The last one should be first, but I'll say it last. It's air, water, food, shelter, medicine, clothes, things like that from the environment. Companionship, what we're doing right now. And you know what the most important one was? It should be above 1 is sleep. If we don't sleep, we die. Okay. And a lot of our society is around anxiety and not sleeping enough. And then we go down these rabbit holes of I need this and I need that when we don't think about the basic things we need. Material things and greed and envy are something that has to be addressed right now with our carbon footprint and what it's caused us. So I know that's a little philosophical and deep, but when you start thinking about coexisting in an environment, you got caloric intake, you got waste, and it better be a cycle.
Good point. And just one little thing to tie into that education point is that youth tourism and travel is terribly important to remember that people just dismiss them as a bunch of kids with backpacks running around and flip-flops and getting in the way and going for cheap places. But the thing is that youth tourism generates an awful lot of income, especially for local communities, because the kids, they come, they're backpackers, they stay in, but they stay in hostels, or they'll stay in people's homes and they'll stay 2 or 3 weeks to learn the local language, and they pay the locals as well. And so they eat with them, and this is great. But don't forget, when those backpackers go home, they get themselves nice little jobs, and then a few years later, they'll come back with their spouses and their kids to the same location. So think about the multiplication value of that one backpacker. And then they'll bring their parents and their parents' friends. And then you look at the number of people one little backpacker could bring to your location, you will take very good care of young kids and backpackers you see in your destination, because it's their future. They get to learn things, and they probably work at your wastewater management places, because these younger people, they like this sort of volunteerism thing where they can go and work and feel useful in the places they go to, especially hanging around waiting for their parents to send them more money so they can buy transportation to somewhere else. But this again, it's linked to education, but it's also linked to improving and benefiting the local communities where these people go. So let's not forget the kids. The kids are a multi-billion-dollar industry as far as travel concerned, but they're taken for granted. You know what happens when you take something for granted, right?
Thanks a lot. Roz is going to have to move on. I know she's got some important guests from the Smithsonian there. So before she goes, I want to thank all of our panelists one more time for your time and all your expertise. Really appreciate it.